The Artist's Christmas Portrait, written by Violet Sinclair, narrated by Isadora Blythe. Chapter 1, December 23rd, 1823, Rothbury Abbey. Lady Sophia Sterling was going to murder her publisher. Not literally, of course, though after his latest letter, the thought held distinct appeal. The illustrator must see your creative process firsthand, he'd written. I'm sending him to various Christmas gatherings where he might observe the ton in their natural habitat. Natural habitat. As if she were studying exotic animals for one of those scientific journals Amelia favored. The problem was that Mr. Jacob Livingston, illustrator extraordinaire, could be anywhere, at any party, watching, sketching, perhaps even at this very house party, though what were the odds of that? Sophia stretched on her tiptoes, shoving the midnight tower behind a collection of sermons on the highest shelf of Diana's library. No one would look there. The Duchess of Rothbury's guests were far more likely to reach for Byron or Scott, not meditations on proper Christian conduct. Drat, she muttered as the book stuck, its spine too wide for the space. She pushed harder, grateful that everyone was either greeting Sarah Mitchell, that American educator Amelia had mentioned, or watching the snow begin to fall outside. The library door creaked open behind her. Finding some light Christmas reading? The male voice, tinged with an American accent, made Sophia jump. Her hand slipped, and the midnight tower tumbled from the shelf, landing with a mortifying thud between her and the stranger. The gentleman who bent to retrieve it was not at all what one expected at a duchess's Christmas party. His coat was well made, but bore the telltale wrinkles of travel. His cravat was tied simply, without the elaborate knots English gentlemen favored. His hair, a rich brown that caught the lamplight, was slightly too long for fashion, but it was his hands that caught her attention, long-fingered and stained with what looked like ink or paint. Artist's hands. Oh no, oh no, no, no. He straightened, examining the book's cover with obvious recognition. His mouth curved in a smile that was equal parts amusement and mischief. Lady Midnight? He turned the book to show her the gilt-lettered spine. Isn't this that scandalous Gothic novelist all the matrons pretend not to read? Sophia's face burned. I wouldn't know. I've certainly never read about the pirate captain who kidnaps the Duke's daughter. His eyes, a warm brown with flecks of gold, danced with suppressed laughter. That's shocking, Sophia managed, her voice climbing an octave. She knew exactly how shocking it was. She'd written it during a particularly boring Tuesday when Nathaniel had been droning on about estate management. The stranger stepped closer, still holding her book, her own book, like evidence in a crime. Oh, you haven't reached the part where they're trapped in the cave during the storm? The thunder masking her cries for, How do you know so much about it? Sophia interrupted before he could quote the scene that had taken her 3 drafts to perfect. I illustrated the frontispiece for the new edition. He tapped the book's cover. I've read it professionally, several times actually. Lady Midnight has quite the eye for dramatic tension. Professional. He'd read her work professionally, which meant, you're an illustrator? The words came out as a squeak. Jacob Livingston, at your service. He executed a bow that was more American casualness than English propriety. And you are? Sophia's mind went completely blank. He was here. The illustrator her publisher had sent was here, at this exact party, holding her book while she stood there like a ninny in her Pomona green morning dress, with her hair probably mussed from reaching for high shelves. That is... Sophia, Lucy Pembry's voice rang out from the doorway. There you are! Come meet my cousin Jacob. He's just arrived from London, though he's been traveling the continent for months studying art and Lucy stopped, taking in the scene. You've already met. Your cousin? Sophia's voice definitely squeaked that time. Did I not mention? Jacob's been making quite a name for himself illustrating books and painting portraits. Diana's commissioned him to paint all the young ladies this Christmas. Lucy beamed, clearly delighted with her matchmaking potential. Jacob, this is Lady Sophia Sterling, Nathaniel's youngest sister. Jacob's eyebrows rose. Lady Sophia, the youngest Sterling. His gaze dropped to the book still in his hands, then back to her face. How illuminating. Isn't that one of those Gothic novels? Lucy peered at the book. Oh, Sophia, how daring of you. I wasn't reading it, Sophia said quickly. I was simply organizing. By hiding it behind sermons? Jacob's tone was perfectly innocent, but his eyes sparkled with mirth. How very thorough of you. Lucy laughed. Don't tease her, Jacob. We all read them. Even Charlotte admits they're entertaining, though she prefers Mrs. Radcliffe to these newer authors. And what does Lady Sophia prefer? Jacob asked, his gaze never leaving her face. I prefer novels with substance, Sophia managed. Character development, realistic emotions. Unlike Lady Midnight's work? The challenge in his voice pricked her pride. I didn't say that. Lady Midnight clearly understands the feminine experience. Her heroines are complex, intelligent women trapped by societal expectations who find freedom through dangerous encounters with inappropriate men, Jacob suggested, his smile widening. Through claiming their own agency, Sophia corrected with more heat than intended. Fascinating interpretation. He tilted his head, studying her. You seem to have given this considerable thought for someone who doesn't read such novels. Lucy's delighted laughter interrupted them. Oh, this is wonderful. Jacob, you must paint Sophia first. Diana will be thrilled. You two can discuss literature during the sittings. No, Sophia said too quickly. I mean, surely the other ladies should go first. I wouldn't want to monopolize Mr. Livingston's time. Nonsense. Lucy was already moving toward the door. The light in the morning room is perfect, and with this snow starting, we'll all be trapped inside anyway. Jacob, shall we say tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock? I'd be delighted, Jacob said, still watching Sophia with that unsettling intensity. Though Lady Sophia seems reluctant, perhaps she fears I'll capture her secret Gothic reading tendencies on canvas? I don't have secret Gothic reading tendencies. Of course not. He handed her the book with exaggerated solemnity. Shall I help you file this properly? Under S for sermons, perhaps? Sophia snatched the book, clutching it against her chest. That won't be necessary. Sophia, you're being ridiculous, Lucy said with fond exasperation. It's just a portrait. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, Sophia thought desperately. Everything could go wrong. The man who illustrated her books, who'd drawn her heroine in various states of dramatic peril, was going to spend hours studying her face. What if he recognized something? What if he saw Lady Midnight in her eyes? Tomorrow at 10, she agreed, because refusing would only make things worse. In the morning room. Excellent. Jacob bowed again, that American casualness making the gesture somehow more intimate than formal. I look forward to discovering what other secrets you might be hiding, Lady Sophia. He left with Lucy, who was chattering about family connections and Boston society. Sophia remained in the library, still clutching her own book, her heart racing with a combination of mortification and something else entirely. The illustrator was handsome, dangerously so, with those artist's hands and that knowing smile and eyes that seemed to see right through her careful façade. She thought of her latest manuscript, hidden in her room upstairs, where the heroine meets a mysterious stranger who challenges everything she believes about herself. Life imitating art, though considerably less convenient than fiction. Through the library windows, snow began falling in earnest. If the weather turned as Diana predicted, they'd all be trapped here for days. Days of sitting for a portrait while Jacob Livingston studied her face, asked her questions, those clever eyes watching for what? Sophia shoved the Midnight Tower back onto a random shelf, in full view this time, like she had nothing to hide. But her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her skirts and prepared to face the other guests. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. How much disaster could one portrait sitting cause? She had the sinking feeling she was about to find out. Chapter 2. Jacob Livingston was not, as a rule, a man who arrived late to appointments. He'd learned punctuality from his merchant family. Time was money, appointments were contracts, and tardiness was tantamount to theft. But he'd been up until 3 a.m. sketching. Not just sketching, obsessing if he was honest. His room at Rothbury Abbey was now littered with preliminary drawings of Lady Sophia Sterling, the way her chin lifted when challenged, the flash of indignation in her eyes when he'd teased her about the novel, the delicate flush that had spread from her cheeks down her neck when he'd quoted that particularly heated scene from the Midnight Tower. He'd drawn her a dozen different ways, and none of them captured what he'd seen in the library. That fascinating contradiction of propriety and passion, innocence and intelligence. She defended Lady Midnight's work with the fervor of someone who understood it on a bone-deep level, which was ridiculous. Lady Sophia Sterling, youngest daughter of the late Lord Sterling, sister to the very proper Lord Clarendon, could not possibly understand the desperate yearning that Lady Midnight poured onto every page. Could she? Jacob pushed open the morning room door at 17 minutes past 10, his arms full of supplies, an apology ready on his lips, and stopped dead. Sophia sat in perfect morning light, positioned on a small settee near the windows. She'd arranged herself as formally as a queen awaiting supplicants, spine straight, hands folded, expression serene. She wore a deep blue morning dress that made her eyes appear almost violet, and her dark hair was arranged in a style that was fashionable without being fussy. She looked like every society portrait he'd ever painted. Proper, distant, boring. She also looked furious. Mr. Livingston. Her voice could have frosted the windows. How generous of you to grace me with your presence. I was beginning to wonder if perhaps you'd confused portrait painting with abstract art and decided punctuality was too representational for your aesthetic. Jacob bit back a grin. There she was, the woman who defended fictional heroines with genuine passion. Much more interesting than the porcelain doll she was pretending to be. My apologies, Lady Sophia. I was reviewing Lady Midnight's latest manuscript. The publisher sent it yesterday, and I needed to envision the frontispiece. Have you ever noticed how her heroines always have remarkable eyes? Windows to a soul both tempestuous and true, as she writes. Sophia's carefully arranged expression cracked slightly. That's purple prose of the worst sort. Is it? I find it rather evocative. He began setting up his easel, deliberately taking his time. Though I admit I've been struggling to imagine what tempestuous and true actually looks like in a person. Perhaps if you spent less time reading overwrought Gothic novels and more time observing real people. But that's exactly what I'm doing now, isn't it? Jacob positioned his canvas, pleased to see her flush. Observing, though you're making it rather difficult with that expression. What expression? The one that suggests you're sitting for a funeral portrait rather than a Christmas gift. He mixed colors on his palette, not looking at her directly. Is that how you want to be remembered? Lady Sophia Sterling, who sat very properly and thought very little? Her eyes flashed. There it was, that tempestuous quality Lady Midnight wrote about. How else should I sit, like one of your Gothic heroines, draped dramatically across a chaise with my hand pressed to my forehead? It would be more interesting than this. He gestured at her rigid posture. You look like you're afraid the settee might suddenly develop opinions. Perhaps I'm afraid the artist might suddenly develop punctuality. Taché. Jacob finally looked at her properly, letting himself really see her. But since we're discussing fears, what are you actually afraid of, Lady Sophia? I beg your pardon? Yesterday in the library. You weren't just embarrassed about the book, you were terrified. He began sketching loose lines, catching the defensive tilt of her chin. Why would the youngest Sterling be so frightened of being caught reading popular fiction? I wasn't frightened. I was mortified. There's a difference. Is there? Mortification is social. Fear is personal. His charcoal moved quickly across the canvas. You're afraid of something specific. Being seen, perhaps? Being known? Sophia's careful composure wavered. You're very presumptuous for someone who's known me less than a day. Am I? Or am I simply observant? Jacob paused in his sketching. For instance, I observe that you have ink stains on your right middle finger, mostly hidden by your gloves, but visible at the edge. Fresh ones from this morning. She tucked her hands further into her lap. I observe that you're exhausted, not from last night's entertainment, but from something that kept you up later. Writing letters, perhaps, though who writes letters at such length that they're still tired the next morning? Many people maintain extensive correspondence. I also observe, Jacob continued, warming to his subject, that you can quote Lady Midnight's work with remarkable accuracy for someone who claims not to read it, that you understand her themes with a depth that suggests multiple readings, that you defend her choices as if they're personal attacks on your own character. You're imagining things. Am I? Then sit naturally and prove me wrong. Stop posing like you're afraid I'll discover something scandalous. Sophia's eyes narrowed. You want natural? Fine. She shifted on the settee, abandoning her rigid posture for something more relaxed but somehow more dangerous. Though I should warn you, Mr. Livingston, sometimes people don't like what they see when they look too closely. I'll take that risk. She tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him suddenly aware of his own disheveled appearance. His cravat hastily tied, his coat bearing traces of charcoal, his hair probably standing at odd angles from running his hands through it while drawing. You were up all night too, she observed. Drawing, not the manuscript. You've already completed those illustrations. So what were you drawing? Heat crept up his neck. Preliminary sketches. Of? Various subjects. How evasive, and you accuse me of having secrets. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. Show me. I beg your pardon? Show me these preliminary sketches that kept you up so late you couldn't manage basic punctuality. She rose from the settee with a grace that made his fingers itch to capture it. Unless you're afraid of being seen, being known, the echo of his own words was deliberately provocative. Jacob found himself caught between admiration and alarm as she approached his easel. They're not finished. Neither is my portrait, yet you insist on penetrating observations about my character. She was close enough now that he could smell her perfume, something light and floral with an unexpected undertone of vanilla. Fair is fair, Mr. Livingston. Jacob had no choice but to show her his sketch portfolio, though he kept firm hold of it. The first drawing was innocent enough, the morning room itself establishing setting and light. The second was of the library from yesterday. But that's me, Sophia breathed, staring at a detailed study of her face from yesterday. Eyes bright with indignation, lips parted in argument, entirely alive with passion. You were defending Lady Midnight, Jacob said quietly. The expression was compelling. She turned the page. Another sketch of her, this one laughing at something Lucy had said. Another of her reaching for the high shelf, graceful and determined. And another, her fingers touching the spine of the book, something secret and tender in her expression. You drew all these last night? I was trying to understand the contradiction. What contradiction? Between who you are and who you're pretending to be. Jacob took the portfolio back, closing it carefully. You're playing the proper youngest Sterling, but there's something else there. Something that understands Lady Midnight's heroines because you felt what they feel. Trapped, confined, desperate to be more than what society allows. Sophia was silent for a long moment, and Jacob wondered if he'd gone too far. Then she laughed, not the tinkling society laugh she'd probably been taught, but something real and slightly bitter. You see a great deal for an American, Mr. Livingston. Jacob, he corrected. If we're going to spend hours together while I paint you, we might as well dispense with formality. That would be highly improper. Like reading Gothic novels? Like staying up all night drawing a woman you've just met, she countered. A fair point. Jacob gestured back to the settee. Shall we begin again? And this time, sit however you're comfortable. I want to paint Lady Sophia, not some society portrait that could be anyone. She returned to the settee, but sat differently this time, turned slightly toward the window, one hand resting on a book she'd brought. Not Lady Midnight, he noticed with amusement, but something properly improving. The morning light caught her profile, and Jacob began to paint in earnest. Tell me about Boston, she said after a few minutes of silence. Lucy says you chose art over the family business, a source of continual disappointment to my father. Jacob mixed colors, finding the exact shade of her skin where the light touched it. Livingston men are supposed to build things, ships, fortunes, dynasties, not waste time painting pretty pictures. But you paint anyway. I tried the counting house, nearly died of boredom within a month. He added a touch of blue to the shadow beneath her jaw. Beauty matters, art matters. Capturing truth on canvas, that's building something too, just not something you can sell in a shop, unless you illustrate books for money. He looked up sharply, but her expression was innocent, too innocent. That's different. That's practical. A man has to eat. Of course, very practical, illustrating pirates and kidnapped duchesses. Lady Midnight pays well. She must, if you can afford to travel the continent studying art. Sophia's fingers traced the edge of her book absently. Tell me, what's she like? The mysterious author? Jacob paused in his painting. I've never met her. Everything goes through her publisher, Mr. Blackwood. Very secretive. Perhaps she's hideously ugly. Perhaps she's terrified, Jacob countered. Imagine if people knew who she really was. The scandal, the judgment, her entire life would be ruined. Something flickered across Sophia's face. Yes, it would be. Though I think she must be brilliant, Jacob continued, returning to his painting. The way she writes about yearning, about women wanting more than pretty cages, it's revolutionary, really, disguised as entertainment. You sound like you admire her. I think I'm half in love with her, Jacob admitted with a self-deprecating laugh. Which is pathetic, being in love with someone who exists only in words on a page. Sophia was quiet for so long that Jacob looked up from his canvas. She was staring out the window where snow was beginning to fall more heavily. Perhaps she's in love with her readers too, she said softly. The ones who understand what she's really saying. That would be dangerously romantic. That would be Lady Midnight, she replied, and for just a moment, her smile held secrets he desperately wanted to uncover. The morning room door burst open, and young Catherine Harrington tumbled in, followed by a harried-looking Lord Harrington. Aunt Sophia, Catherine cried. It's snowing properly now. Papa says we might be snowed in for Christmas. Isn't that wonderful? Sophia's whole demeanor transformed, becoming warm and animated as she opened her arms for the child's embrace. Perfectly wonderful, darling. Though you must let Mr. Livingston paint, or Uncle Nathaniel will have no gift for Aunt Amelia. Are you painting Aunt Sophia? Catherine studied the canvas with 8-year-old intensity. You've made her look thinking. She does that a lot, especially when she thinks no one's watching. Catherine, Lord Harrington said with mild reproof, though his eyes held amusement. We shouldn't disturb. She also writes in a secret book, Catherine announced. I've seen her, late at night when she thinks everyone's asleep. Catherine, Sophia's cheeks flamed. It's true, you had ink all over your hands yesterday too. Are you writing stories? Like those books Mama says I'm too young to read? Jacob couldn't suppress his grin at Sophia's mortification. What kind of stories do you think your aunt writes? Adventure ones, probably, with pirates. She was reading a pirate book yesterday. I saw it in the library. We should go, Lord Harrington said quickly, clearly sensing Sophia's distress. Catherine, come along. As they left, Catherine's voice carried back. Do you think Aunt Sophia knows Lady Midnight? They both write about pirates. The morning room fell silent except for the soft sound of snow against the windows. Children, Sophia said weakly. Such imagination. Indeed. Jacob mixed a new color, trying to capture the exact shade of her blush. Though I notice you didn't deny it. Deny what? Writing stories, late at night, in secret. Don't be ridiculous. But her hand had moved to cover the ink stain on her finger, and Jacob smiled as he painted, already imagining what secrets those midnight writings might contain. Chapter 3. Sophia had never given much thought to the particular torture of sitting through a formal Christmas dinner, while the man who'd spent the morning studying her face sat close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood and turpentine. It shouldn't have been appealing, but every time Jacob leaned past her to accept a dish from the footman, that scent made her pulse flutter like one of her own heroines facing delicious danger. Diana had outdone herself with the Christmas Eve feast. The dining room glowed with the light of hundreds of candles, their flames reflecting off crystal and silver until the entire room seemed to sparkle. Garlands of holly and ivy wound around the chandelier, and the sideboard groaned under the weight of roasted goose, glazed ham, and every possible Christmas delicacy. The decorations are magnificent, Sarah Mitchell said from across the table, her American accent carrying warm appreciation, though I've never seen quite so many candles at once. Diana believes Christmas should be bright enough to banish any shadow, Eleanor Blackwood replied, exchanging a fond look with her husband Thomas. Last year, she nearly set the curtains ablaze with her enthusiasm. That was Gabriel's fault, Diana protested, laughing. He insisted on demonstrating some naval tradition with flaming pudding. In my defense, The Duke said with dignified amusement. The pudding was supposed to flame briefly, not explode. The table erupted in laughter, and Sophia felt herself relax slightly. These were good people, friends and family who'd known their own scandals and emerged stronger. Speaking of traditions, Charlotte Sears said with a mischievous glance at her husband William, remember our first Christmas together? You tried to convince me that Americans open gifts on Christmas Eve. It's a perfectly reasonable tradition, William protested. Why wait until morning when everyone's together in the evening? My father was horrified, Charlotte laughed. Though Mother found it rather charming, she's developed quite a fondness for American practicality. I've grown fond of English Christmas traditions myself, Lucy Pembry said, squeezing Marcus's hand. The Yule log, the wassailing, the ghost stories. Those ghost stories were terrifying, Amelia added with a shiver, though Lord Harrington's tale about the weeping bride was particularly effective. Years of practice reading to Catherine, Lord Harrington said modestly, though his gaze kept drifting to Sarah Mitchell. Children appreciate a properly dramatic delivery. Speaking of dramatic deliveries, Nathaniel said, his stern expression softened by wine and company, Sophia has been practicing her dramatic readings lately. I heard her through the library door yesterday reciting something about storms and passion. Sophia's fork clattered against her plate. I was reading aloud to practice elocution, perfectly normal. At midnight? Nathaniel's eyebrow rose. Must have been fascinating material to keep you up so late. Some books are worth losing sleep over, Jacob said innocently from beside her, particularly those with compelling narratives about, what was it? Storms and passion? His knee brushed against hers under the table, deliberately. Byron, Sophia said quickly. I was reading Byron. Byron doesn't write about pirates, Catherine Harrington piped up from her seat beside her father. But that book Aunt Sophia had yesterday did, the one with the pretty cover. Catherine, eat your vegetables, Lord Harrington said hastily. Speaking of books, Diana said with obvious delight in the turn of conversation, has anyone read the latest novels from London? I ordered several for the library. Depends on the type of novel, Thomas Blackwood said with amusement. Eleanor has been devouring everything Hatchard sends. Educational reading, Eleanor protested. One must stay current with literary trends. Is that what we're calling Gothic novels now? Thomas teased. Literary trends? Lady Pemberton sniffed from down the table. Gothic novels are hardly appropriate dinner conversation. Oh, I disagree, Jacob said, and Sophia felt his attention like warmth from the candles. They're fascinating windows into contemporary anxieties, all those innocent heroines trapped in dark castles, searching for freedom and agency. Mr. Livingston reads Gothic novels? Lady Pemberton's tone suggested he'd admitted to something shameful. I illustrate them. It requires understanding the themes. His fingers brushed Sophia's as they both reached for their wine glasses. Some might say it's the most honest form of literature, acknowledging what people actually want to read rather than what they should want. Fascinating perspective, Diana said, her eyes bright with interest. You must have such insights into what makes them popular. Fear and desire, Jacob said simply. The two most powerful human emotions, wrapped in metaphor, just transparent enough to be thrilling, but opaque enough to be acceptable. Sophia took a large sip of wine, trying not to think about how perfectly he'd just described her writing philosophy. That's rather profound for Christmas Eve dinner, Marcus observed with a grin. Americans, Lucy said fondly. We can't help being philosophical. It comes from all that revolutionary fervor. Speaking of fervor, Charlotte said with a meaningful look at Sophia, some of us are more passionate about these novels than others. I've seen certain people hiding books behind sermon collections. Heat flooded Sophia's cheeks. That was organizational necessity. Of course it was, Charlotte agreed, her smile suggesting otherwise. The footman began serving the Christmas pudding, and conversation turned to safer topics. But Sophia remained acutely aware of Jacob beside her, the way his laugh rumbled low in his chest, the way his fingers wrapped around his wine glass, the way he kept finding excuses to lean closer. When Diana finally rose to lead the ladies to the drawing room, Sophia felt both relief and disappointment. She needed distance from Jacob's knowing looks and casual touches that were setting her nerves on fire. But as she passed his chair, he caught her wrist briefly, secretly. "Don't go far," he murmured. "The evening's entertainment is just beginning." The drawing room had been transformed into a cozy Christmas paradise. A fire crackled in the enormous hearth. Presents were piled beneath a small decorated tree in the corner, and comfortable chairs had been arranged for optimal conversation and warmth. Through the tall windows, snow continued to fall in thick, heavy flakes that promised to trap them all thoroughly by morning. Sophia had barely settled into a chair by the fire when the men began filtering in. Apparently the port hadn't held their attention long. "Abandoned tradition already?" Charlotte teased as William appeared. Jacob pointed out that American men prefer their wives of company to port, William replied, settling beside her. "Set a dangerous precedent." "Everything Americans do sets dangerous precedents," Marcus said cheerfully, claiming the spot next to Lucy. "It's part of their charm." Thomas Blackwood made straight for Eleanor, and even Nathaniel appeared, looking slightly bewildered by the break in protocol but unwilling to leave Amelia. Lord Harrington followed with Sarah Mitchell, and Gabriel arrived last, shrugging at his wife's delighted expression. "So much for sacred male bonding," Diana laughed, "though I can't say I'm disappointed. Christmas Eve should be spent together." "Speaking of togetherness," Lucy said with a mischievous glint that made Sophia nervous, "I've brought entertainment." She produced a small book from behind a cushion. "The latest Lady Midnight." Several of the men groaned. "Really, darling?" Marcus said with fond exasperation. "On Christmas Eve?" "The Duke's December Bride," Lucy read from the cover with relish. "Just released this month. I had to bribe Hatchards to hold a copy for me." Sophia's blood turned to ice. That wasn't supposed to be available yet. The publisher had promised it wouldn't be in shops until after Christmas. She'd specifically requested that to avoid. "Oh, let me see." Eleanor reached for the book eagerly. "Is this the one with the snowstorm?" "And the isolated castle," Lucy confirmed. "And the dangerous Duke with the mysterious past." "For heaven's sake," Nathaniel muttered. "Must we?" "You can leave if you're scandalized, brother," Sophia said, though her voice came out higher than intended. "No one's forcing you to stay." "And miss watching my proper sister squirm through improper literature?" Nathaniel's tone was teasing. "Never." "I'll read a passage," Lucy announced, opening to a random page, "for Christmas entertainment." Sophia gripped her hands together in her lap, praying Lucy wouldn't choose anything too. The Duke stood silhouetted against the frosted window, his broad shoulders tense with barely contained emotion. Snow fell beyond the glass, trapping them together in a world reduced to this single room, this charged moment between them. "Atmospheric," Charlotte murmured with amusement. Lady Catherine knew she should retreat, should maintain the careful distance that propriety demanded. But something in his stance, something in the way his hands gripped the window frame as though restraining himself from reaching for her, made retreat impossible. Jacob had moved to stand behind Sophia's chair. She could feel the heat from his body, smell that maddening combination of sandalwood and turpentine. "You should go," the Duke said, his voice rough with want. "Before I do something we'll both regret." "Melodramatic," Thomas observed, though he was listening intently. "Regret is for people who choose safety over feeling," Lady Catherine replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "I've been safe my entire life. Perhaps it's time I chose something else." Sophia's hands clenched tighter. She'd written those words just last week, pouring her own frustration into Lady Catherine's declaration. "That's rather profound for a Gothic novel," Sarah Mitchell observed thoughtfully. "Lady Midnight always surprises," Jacob said from directly behind Sophia. "Her heroines say things that proper ladies only think." "How would you know what proper ladies think?" Sophia asked, twisting to look up at him. His smile was slow, dangerous. "I pay attention." "Shall I continue?" Lucy asked with obvious delight. "Please," Eleanor said eagerly. "What does the Duke do?" Lucy flipped a few pages forward. The Duke crossed the room in 3 strides, his control finally shattered. Lady Catherine had a moment to see the wild intention in his eyes before his mouth claimed hers with desperate hunger. "My," Lady Harrington murmured, fanning herself. She should have been shocked, should have pushed him away. Instead, she melted against him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, feeling the contained strength there, the careful restraint even in his passion. Very detailed, Marcus observed, his tone amused. Lady Midnight certainly has a gift for physical description. She understands passion, Sophia said before she could stop herself. There's nothing wrong with that. Everyone turned to look at her. That's quite a defense for an author you don't read, Nathaniel said slowly. I didn't say I don't read her. I said her books aren't inappropriate. Sophia's chin lifted. She writes about women making choices, about wanting more than empty marriages and pretty cages. You sound as though you've given this considerable thought, Eleanor observed. Perhaps I have. Perhaps some of us appreciate literature that acknowledges women have minds and hearts and desires beyond embroidery and menu planning. Desires. Nathaniel's voice carried danger. What kind of desires, exactly? The desire for adventure, for passion, for a life that means something. Sophia was standing now, though she didn't remember rising, for the freedom to choose love over duty, feeling over safety. You're quoting, Jacob said quietly. That's from the Midnight Tower, chapter 12. Everyone stared at Sophia. You've memorized passages? Charlotte asked with delight. I have an excellent memory. For Gothic novels you claim not to read regularly, Lucy added, her eyes sparkling. I never said I don't read them regularly. I said. Sophia stopped, realizing she'd been trapped. Oh, you're all horrible. Sophia reads Lady Midnight, Eleanor announced with satisfaction. Extensively, by the sound of it. I read many things, Sophia said defensively. But you defend Lady Midnight as if she's a personal friend, Thomas observed with artistic perception. As if criticism of her work is criticism of you. That's ridiculous. Is it? Nathaniel stood, approaching her with brotherly suspicion. You stay up late practicing elocution. You have ink stains constantly. You defend these novels with remarkable passion. Because they're good, Sophia burst out. Because they're about more than just romance. They're about women trapped by society's expectations, finding ways to claim their own lives. They're about the courage it takes to want something different. You sound as though you're writing a literary defense, Jacob said from behind her. Or perhaps writing something else? Sophia spun to face him. What are you implying? I'm implying that you're obviously passionate about these stories, passionate enough to stay up late reading them, to memorize entire passages, to defend them against any criticism. His eyes held hers. One might almost think you were trying to write something similar yourself. The room went silent. Sophia felt heat flood her face. Right? She laughed. Too high, too bright. Don't be absurd. I'm the youngest Sterling. I embroider. I play pianoforte adequately. I make social calls. I don't write novels. Of course not, Jacob agreed, but his smile suggested he didn't believe her at all. Though if you did, I imagine they'd be remarkable. You clearly understand what makes Lady Midnight's work so compelling. Anyone could understand that if they actually read the books instead of dismissing them. Then educate us, he challenged. What makes them so special? Sophia met his gaze, forgetting their audience, forgetting everything but the challenge in his eyes. They're about truth dressed in fiction, about women who refuse to be decorative objects in someone else's life, about the difference between existing and living, about choosing the dangerous unknown over the safe familiar, because at least the unknown offers the possibility of joy. Her voice had grown passionate, intimate, as though she were speaking only to him. Lady Midnight understands that every woman has a story beyond what society sees, that inside every proper lady is someone wild and brave and desperate to be free. She writes the stories we tell ourselves at night when we're alone with our true thoughts. She writes our secret hearts. The silence that followed was deafening. Good heavens, Lady Pemberton said faintly. That was quite impassioned. Sophia, Nathaniel said slowly, you sound as though you've given this more than casual thought. Perhaps I have. Sophia lifted her chin defiantly. Perhaps some of us need stories that tell us we're not alone in wanting more. More than what? Jacob asked softly. More than this. She gestured around the elegant room. More than proper conversation and suitable marriages and a life prescribed from birth. More than... She stopped, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at her with varying degrees of shock and fascination. I should go, she said quickly. The heat from the fire is... I need air. She fled toward the door, her face burning with mortification. She'd revealed too much, been too passionate, too honest about her feelings. "Sophia, wait." Jacob's voice followed her, but she was already in the hallway, practically running toward the library. She made it to the library door before he caught up, his hand gentle on her arm. "That was remarkable," he said softly. "That was mortifying. That was honest. Perhaps the first completely honest thing anyone said all evening." She turned to face him, finding him closer than expected. "They all think I'm ridiculous now. Sophia Sterling, the Gothic novel fanatic. They think you're passionate. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it feels the same. Sophia?" The way he said her name made her pulse skip. "There's nothing wrong with wanting more, with reading books that make you feel understood. You don't understand if they knew." She stopped herself. "Knew what?" "Nothing. Just the extent of my reading, the depth of my interest." He stepped closer and she found herself backing against the library door. "Interest in Gothic novels? Or interest in writing them?" "I don't write." "No?" He reached past her to turn the door handle, and for a moment, they were so close she could feel his breath on her cheek. "Then what are all those ink stains from? And why do you understand Lady Midnight's work as though you've lived inside her mind?" "Because I have lived it," she whispered. "Every woman who's been told to be quiet, be good, be satisfied with less, we've all lived it." Something shifted in his expression, from teasing to something deeper. "You're remarkable, you know that? I'm a disaster. You're alive. There's a difference between existing and living, remember? You just said so." His hand came up to rest against the door beside her head, and Sophia found herself trapped between wood and warmth, between safety and danger. "Jacob," she breathed. "Tell me to step back," he murmured. "Tell me this is improper. Everything about this is improper. But not unwanted?" She looked up into his eyes, finding heat and humor and something that might have been admiration. Not unwanted. For a moment she thought he might kiss her. The air between them crackled with possibility. His gaze dropped to her lips, and she found herself swaying toward him slightly. "Am I interrupting something?" Lucy's voice made them spring apart. Jacob's cousin stood at the end of the hallway, her expression a mixture of amusement and protective concern. "Lucy," Jacob said, his voice slightly rough. "We were just having an intense literary discussion in a dark hallway." Lucy's eyebrow rose. "How educational. Sophia, are you well? You left rather suddenly." "I'm fine," Sophia managed, her cheeks burning. "Just needed a moment." "Of course." Lucy's gaze moved between them with knowing assessment. "Well, we're about to play charades. Diana insists, and you know how she is about Christmas games. Besides," she added with a meaningful look at Jacob, "I hardly think it's appropriate for you two to be alone out here. People might talk." "Since when do you care about people talking?" Jacob asked. "Since I'm responsible for you while you're in England, dear cousin. Your mother would never forgive me if you caused a scandal." Lucy's tone was light, but her eyes held warning. "Come along, both of you, before someone else comes looking and finds you in this rather compromising position." Sophia realized she was still pressed against the library door with Jacob far too close for propriety. She quickly stepped away, smoothing her skirts. "Charades sounds delightful," she said with forced brightness. "Doesn't it?" Lucy agreed, linking her arm through Sophia's in a gesture that was both friendly and firmly separating her from Jacob. "And Sophia, don't worry about your passionate defense of Lady Midnight. Half the ladies in there read her novels under their bed covers. You're just brave enough to admit it." As Lucy led her back toward the drawing room, Sophia caught Jacob's gaze over her shoulder. His expression promised that their conversation, and whatever else had almost happened, was far from over. "He's handsome, isn't he?" Lucy murmured quietly. "My cousin, talented too, but Sophia, be careful. Jacob has a romantic artist's soul. He falls in love with ideas as easily as people." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Lucy squeezed her arm gently. "Just be certain he sees you, not just what he thinks you represent. There's a difference between loving someone's passion and loving the person themselves." As they entered the drawing room to enthusiastic calls for charades teams, Sophia wondered if Lucy was warning her about Jacob or about herself. Chapter 4. Jacob threw down his charcoal in disgust. Wrong, again. His room looked like an artist's fever dream, or nightmare, depending on perspective. Sketches of Sophia Sterling covered every surface, the desk, the chairs, scattered across his bed, tacked to the walls. He'd drawn her laughing during charades, her eyes flashing with indignation when Marcus had dared suggest Lady Midnight lacked subtlety, the soft vulnerability in her expression when she thought no one was watching during evening prayers. But none of them captured what he'd seen in the hallway. That moment when she'd looked up at him, her lips parted, swaying toward him, like a flower-seeking sun. The expression had been part desire, part fear, part something else entirely, something that made his chest tight and his hands itch to create. Lucy's interruption had been fortuitous, probably. If she hadn't appeared, he would have kissed Sophia Sterling right there against the library door. The thought of what her mouth might taste like, how she might respond, had kept him awake despite the late hour. He picked up a fresh piece of paper, determined to try once more. The house had fallen silent an hour ago. Everyone retired after the Christmas Eve festivities. Even the servants had been dismissed early for their own celebrations. Only the occasional pop from the dying fire broke the silence. Jacob began with her eyes, those expressive eyes that revealed every emotion she tried to hide. The way they'd darkened when he'd stood close to her, the way they'd fluttered closed for just a moment when his hand had brushed hers at dinner. No, still not right. He crumpled the paper and tossed it aside, moving to the window to clear his head. The snow was coming down heavily now, thick flakes that obscured the grounds in shifting veils of white. The storm Diana had predicted was arriving with vengeance. By morning, they'd be completely trapped. Movement in the snow caught his eye. Jacob leaned closer to the frost-covered window, wiping a clear spot with his sleeve. Someone was walking through the garden. No, not walking, stumbling. A slight figure in what appeared to be, was that at a nightgown and shawl? His heart stopped. It was Sophia. Even through the snow, he recognized her, but something was wrong. She was moving erratically, pawing at what looked like the kitchen door. Her movements were desperate, frantic. She was locked out. Damn it! The thermometer on his windowsill read well below freezing. How long had she been out there? Jacob didn't remember moving. One moment he was at the window, the next he was racing down the servants' stairs, grabbing his greatcoat as he ran. The house was eerily quiet. All the fires banked, shadows dancing in the faint light from scattered candles left burning for safety. The kitchen door. He'd seen her by the kitchen door. He ran through the darkened hallways toward the back of the house, his boots echoing on the stone floors. He reached the kitchen and found the door locked from the inside. Of course, some helpful servant had secured it against the storm, not knowing anyone was outside. He turned the key and pulled the door open, immediately assaulted by wind and snow. "Sophia!" She was huddled against the doorframe, her arms wrapped around herself, shivering violently. Her nightgown was soaked through, snow thick in her hair, her skin pale in the dim light from the kitchen. Jacob?" Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely speak. "Good God, what were you thinking?" He pulled her inside, slamming the door against the storm. She stumbled, her legs barely working, and he caught her against him. Her whole body was trembling, her nightgown like ice against his hands. "See, couldn't get in," she managed. "Come on, we need to get you warm." He half carried her through the kitchen toward the main part of the house. The library would be best. He'd seen embers still glowing in the fireplace when he'd passed earlier. Her weight against him was slight, her violent shivering making it difficult to support her properly. They made it to the library, and Jacob guided her directly to the fireplace where, thank God, embers still glowed faintly. "Need to get you warm," he muttered, setting her in a chair and dropping to his knees to coax the fire back to life. His hands shook as he added kindling, and not entirely from cold. She could have died, if he hadn't been awake, hadn't seen her. The fire caught, flames beginning to dance. Jacob turned back to Sophia, who was still shivering violently, her nightgown soaked through and clinging to her frame in ways that would have been indecent if she weren't in danger of freezing to death. "What the hell were you doing out there?" The words came out harsher than intended, but fear made his voice rough. She opened her mouth to answer, but only chattering teeth and violent tremors emerged. Never mind. We need to get you warm first. He grabbed a throw from the sofa, wrapping it around her shoulders. Can you feel your fingers? Your toes? She shook her head, tears sliding down her frozen cheeks. We need to get you out of these wet clothes. He stopped, realizing what he'd just suggested. That is, I'll turn around. But when he started to move away, her hand shot out, gripping his sleeve with surprising strength. Don't go. Her eyes were wide with lingering terror. Please. Jacob's chest tightened at the fear in her voice. Whatever had driven her out into that storm, the experience had terrified her. I'm not going anywhere, he promised, settling beside her chair. But Sophia, we need to get you properly warm. You're soaked through. She nodded, seeming to realize the necessity. See, can you unlace? Her nightgown laced up the back. Of course it did. Jacob moved behind her chair, his fingers fumbling with the frozen laces. The fabric was stiff with ice, making every movement difficult. He tried not to think about the fact that he was undressing Sophia Sterling in the library, or about the pale skin revealed as the nightgown loosened. Keep the blanket around you, he instructed, his voice carefully neutral. I'll find you something dry. He turned his back while she struggled out of the frozen nightgown, wrapping herself in the throw. The rustle of wet fabric hitting the floor seemed impossibly loud in the quiet library. What were you doing out there? He asked again, staring determinedly at the bookshelf while she adjusted the blanket. Silence. Then, barely audible, it doesn't matter. It matters. He turned to face her, finding her huddled in the throw, looking small and vulnerable, and nothing like the passionate woman who defended Gothic novels hours earlier. Sophia, you nearly died. Why were you outside in a storm wearing nothing but your nightclothes? She looked away, fresh tears sliding down her cheeks. You'll think I'm foolish. I already think you're foolish. Magnificent and passionate and brave, but definitely foolish. He moved closer, kneeling beside her chair. Tell me. But she pressed her lips together, shivering in her blanket, refusing to meet his eyes. Whatever her secret, she wasn't ready to share it. Not yet. Fine, he said, standing. Keep your secrets, but you're not leaving this room until you're properly warm, and I'm certain you won't collapse from cold. He added more wood to the fire, building it into a proper blaze. Then he pulled the sofa closer to the hearth, gathering every blanket and throw he could find in the library. Come here, he said, gesturing to the sofa. You need to be closer to the heat. She stood shakily, the blanket wrapped tightly around her, and made her way to the sofa. When she sat, he piled more blankets over her, tucking them around her still trembling form. Better? She nodded, though her lips still had a bluish tinge that worried him. Jacob sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. They sat in silence, watching the fire, while her shivering gradually subsided. I could have died, she whispered suddenly. Yes. You saved my life? Yes. Why were you awake? He gestured to his paint-stained hands. Drawing. I couldn't sleep. Drawing what? You. The single word hung between them, weighted with implication. Sophia turned to look at him, her eyes wide in the firelight. Me? I've been trying to capture your expression from earlier, in the hallway, when I almost... He stopped, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how the blanket had slipped slightly from her shoulder, revealing the pale curve of her neck. When you almost kissed me, she finished quietly. Yes. They stared at each other, the fire crackling beside them, snow still falling heavily outside. Something shifted in the air between them, the terror of near death transforming into something else entirely. Why didn't you? She asked. Lucy interrupted. That's not what I mean. After she left, when we returned to the drawing room, you could have pursued it. Jacob was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because when I kiss you, and I will kiss you, Sophia, I want it to be because you want it, not because you're caught up in a moment. I want you to choose it. Her breath caught audibly. And if I choose it now? He studied her face, seeing the lingering effects of cold and fear, but also something else. Determination. Desire. Now you're half frozen and wrapped in a blanket in a library after nearly dying. It's hardly the appropriate moment for... But whatever he'd been about to say was lost as the library door opened and someone entered, making them both freeze. They had perhaps seconds before whoever it was discovered them in this compromising position. Sophia in nothing but a blanket, him far too close for propriety, alone in the middle of the night. Their eyes met in mutual panic. This was about to become a very different kind of disaster. Chapter 5. This was it. Ruin. Sophia clutched the blanket tighter around her bare shoulders as footsteps approached through the library doorway. In approximately 3 seconds, someone would discover her wearing nothing but a throw blanket, alone with Jacob Livingston in the middle of the night, her frozen nightgown in a sodden heap on the floor, all for the sake of properly describing how snow felt against bare skin, how wind could steal breath and thought, how cold could creep into bones until lying down in the snow seemed perfectly reasonable. The absurd thought made her lips twitch despite her terror. Lady Midnight's next heroine would experience the most authentic blizzard scene ever written. If Sophia survived the social destruction about to rain down upon her, worth it, a treacherous voice whispered in her mind. Almost freezing to death had given her enough material for 3 chapters. "Pardon me, my lord." "Oh." A young footman stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. Roberts thought vaguely, new to the household staff. Roberts. Jacob's voice carried the particular tone of aristocratic authority Americans weren't supposed to possess. Lady Sophia took ill during evening prayers. The library was closest. The footman's gaze darted to Sophia's wet nightgown on the floor, then immediately away. "Of course, Mr. Livingston. Should I fetch someone? Her ladyship's maid?" "That won't be necessary. Lady Sophia is recovering. You may go." "Yes, sir. I was just checking the fires before retiring. I'll see to the other rooms." Roberts backed out of the room with the haste of someone who desperately wanted to see nothing, know nothing, and most definitely say nothing. The door clicked shut behind him. Sophia released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He saw my nightgown. He saw a wet garment. Nothing more. He saw me, like this. She gestured to her blanket-wrapped state. "With you." He saw a lady who'd taken ill being tended by a family friend near the fire. Jacob moved closer, his eyes concerned. "Roberts is discreet. All Diana's servants are. How can you be so calm? We were almost ruined, perhaps, but you weren't, and we weren't." He settled beside her on the sofa, careful not to touch. "Though I notice you don't seem as horrified as you should be." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I'm completely horrified." "Are you? Because for a moment there, just before Roberts spoke, you smiled. Damn him for being observant." "I did not." "You did. A tiny smile, like you were thinking of something that amused you despite the circumstances." He tilted his head, studying her. "What were you thinking?" "Nothing." "Sophia, it doesn't matter. Everything about tonight matters. You nearly died. Why were you out there?" Rep. The question she'd been dreading. Sophia pulled the blanket tighter, looking away from his too perceptive gaze. "I told you. You'll think I'm foolish." "I already established that. Tell me anyway." She was quiet for a long moment, listening to the fire crack and the wind howl outside. The storm had given her exactly what she'd sought: experience, authenticity, truth she could pour onto pages. But how to explain that to someone who didn't understand the desperate need to capture reality in words? "I couldn't sleep," she began carefully. "I kept thinking about something I'd read, a scene in a book where the heroine is lost in a snowstorm." "Ah," Jacob's voice held something she couldn't identify. "Let me guess. Lady Midnight?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "And the scene bothered you because—" It was wrong. The words came out in a rush. The author described the cold as biting, and the snow as gentle, and the heroine's thoughts as crystal clear. But that's not how it is at all. The cold doesn't bite, it seeps, it crawls under your skin and makes you stupid. Snow isn't gentle in a storm. It's vicious, blinding, choking, and your thoughts don't stay clear. They go fuzzy and strange, and you start thinking terrible things make sense. She realized she was rambling and stopped, embarrassed by her passion. "So you went outside to experience it properly," Jacob said slowly, "to understand what it really felt like." "I only meant to step out for a moment, just to feel the wind, the snow, but the door shut behind me and locked, and then I couldn't find it again in the storm, and everything went white and terrible. She shuddered, remembering the creeping certainty that she would die for her curiosity. All for a book. Not just a book. She turned to face him, needing him to understand. For truth, for getting it right, for making readers feel what it really means to be caught in something beyond their control. You risked your life for accurate description? I risked my life for art. The words hung between them, too revealing, too honest. Sophia waited for him to laugh, to dismiss her passion as feminine hysteria or Gothic novel foolishness. Instead, he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm, steady, real. I understand, he said simply. You do? I spent 6 months sleeping in a Florence slum to understand how light moved through poverty. Nearly died of fever twice. My family thought I'd gone mad. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But I had to know. Had to see how beauty persisted even in squalor. Had to understand how people could create art when they could barely afford bread. And did you understand? I learned that truth is worth any risk. That capturing something real, something that matters, that's the only thing that makes us more than pretty decorations in the world. Sophia's breath caught. He did understand. This American artist with his paint-stained fingers and careful eyes, he knew what it meant to need truth more than safety. I want to write, she heard herself say, not just read about adventures, but create them. Give women stories where they're brave and passionate and choose their own paths. Like Lady Midnight does, yes, like she does. The half-truth burned her throat. But better, truer, with real emotion and real danger and real consequences. Is that what you were doing in your room all those nights? Writing? She nodded, unable to speak past the vulnerability of admission. Show me. What? Show me something you've written. Let me read your truth. Panic flared in her chest. I couldn't. It's not ready. It's rough and unpolished and real. He squeezed her hand gently. That's what matters, not polish. Truth. You don't understand. If anyone knew I was writing, attempting to write, novels about passion and adventure and women choosing dangerous men over safe ones, your reputation would be destroyed, completely. And yet you smiled when you thought you'd been caught. Some part of you thought ruin might be worth it for your art. The observation was too accurate. Sophia tried to pull her hand away, but he held firm. There's no shame in wanting to create something meaningful, he said softly. No shame in having passion for your work. Easy for you to say, you're a man, you're allowed to have passion, I'm supposed to have accomplishments, watercolors and pianoforte and pleasant conversation. You have those too. But they're not enough. The words burst out of her. They've never been enough. I want to matter. Want to create something that lasts beyond my lifetime. Want to write stories that make women feel less alone in their wanting. Then write them. And risk everything? Yes. His eyes held hers, dark and serious. Risk everything, because the alternative is dying slowly in a pretty cage, and you're too alive for that. Something shifted in Sophia's chest, a lock tumbling open that had been sealed for years. This man, this inappropriate American artistic man, saw her. Not the youngest Sterling, not the Gothic novel enthusiast, not even the aspiring writer. He saw her. You're dangerous, she whispered. Am I? You make me want to be brave. You already are brave. You walked into a blizzard for your art. That was foolish. That was magnificent. He moved closer, and she caught that scent of sandalwood and turpentine that would forever mean him. You're magnificent. The blanket had slipped from her shoulder, but Sophia didn't adjust it. The fire crackled beside them, casting golden light across Jacob's face, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. Jacob, she breathed. Tell me to move away, he murmured, his free hand coming up to trace her cheek. Tell me this is improper. Everything about this is improper. But not unwanted? She thought of all the Gothic heroines she'd read about, all the dangerous moments she'd written, all the kisses she'd imagined but never experienced. None of them had prepared her for this. The reality of wanting something so much it eclipsed every careful rule she'd lived by. Not unwanted, she admitted. His hand slid into her hair, still damp from snow, and she had a moment to see his intent before his mouth claimed hers. The kiss was nothing like she'd written. Nothing like the chaste pecks she'd observed at weddings, or the fumbling attempt Lord Carrington had made during her first season. This was fire and demand and a hunger that matched her own. Jacob kissed like he painted, with complete focus and devastating skill. His tongue traced the seam of her lips, and she gasped at the sensation. He took advantage, deepening the kiss until she was drowning in him, her hands fisting in his shirt to anchor herself. The blanket slipped further, but she didn't care. All that mattered was his mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, the sound he made when she tentatively touched her tongue to his. He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, practically climbing into his lap in her eagerness to eliminate any distance between them. She'd written about passion, about desire that consumed rational thought, but she'd never understood it until this moment. Until Jacob's hands skimmed her bare shoulders, leaving trails of fire. Until his mouth moved to her throat, finding a spot beneath her ear that made her gasp. Sophia, he murmured against her skin, her name a prayer and a plea. She pulled him back up, crashing her mouth to his with an abandon that should have shocked her. She was kissing a man while wearing nothing but a blanket. In the library, where anyone could discover them. The thought should have horrified her. Instead, it thrilled her. This was what her heroines felt. This wild, reckless need that made propriety seem like chains to be broken. This was what she'd been trying to capture in words, but had never understood in her body. Jacob's hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, and Sophia made a sound she'd never made before. Pure want, pure need. The sound seemed to shock them both. They broke apart, breathing hard, staring at each other in the firelight. Jacob's hair was thoroughly mussed, his shirt pulled askew where she'd gripped it. His eyes were dark, pupils blown wide, and his gaze kept dropping to her lips like he wanted to devour her again. Sophia became suddenly, acutely aware of her state. The blanket had fallen almost completely, pooling around her waist. Her hair was wild, her lips swollen, her whole body flushed with a heat that had nothing to do with the fire. "Oh God," she whispered, reality crashing back. "Oh God, what did we—" "I have to go. Sophia, wait." But she was already standing, clutching the blanket around herself, backing away from him and the temptation he represented. This was, "We can't, I have to go." "You're not even dressed. Let me at least." "No," the word came out too sharp, too loud. "Please, just let me go." She fled before he could argue, grabbing her sodden nightgown from the floor and practically running from the library. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. She'd kissed him like a wanton, like one of her own reckless heroines. And worse, far worse, she wanted to do it again. Sophia made it to her room through sheer luck, encountering no one in the darkened hallways. She locked the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her lips still tingled, her skin still burned where he'd touched her. And deep in her belly, something new and dangerous had awakened, a hunger that no amount of Gothic novel reading had prepared her for. She'd researched a snowstorm and discovered a different kind of tempest entirely, one that threatened to destroy everything she'd carefully built. And God help her, she wanted to walk straight back into the storm. Chapter 6. Jacob stared at the sketches of Sophia Sterling, covering every surface of his room, his body still humming from their kiss, his mind trying to process what had just happened. He'd kissed many women, Boston society belles who giggled behind their fans, Italian models who posed for artists and expected seduction as part of the arrangement, even a French comtesse who'd taught him that passion could be an art form in itself. None of them had kissed him back like Sophia Sterling. She'd been untutored but eager, inexperienced but instinctive. The sounds she'd made, Christ, those sounds would haunt him. But it was more than physical response that had shaken him. It was the way she'd trusted him with her secret, the way she'd spoken about writing with the same fervor he felt about painting. "I want to matter, want to create something that lasts." Jacob understood that hunger. It had driven him from Boston's comfortable counting houses to Florence's dangerous streets. It made him stay up all night trying to capture light on canvas. It was the reason he'd never been able to settle for the safe, profitable life his father had planned. And Sophia Sterling, proper English lady, youngest sister of the very proper Lord Clarendon, felt it too. She wanted to write like Lady Midnight, to create those same passionate stories that captured truth through fiction. He picked up his charcoal and began drawing from memory. Sophia in the blanket, firelight playing across her skin. Sophia's face when she'd admitted she wanted to write. Sophia's expression just before he'd kissed her. Anticipation and fear and desperate wanting all mixed together. This time, he captured it perfectly. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the storm having blown itself out, leaving Rothbury Abbey surrounded by pristine white drifts that sparkled like diamonds. Jacob descended to breakfast to find the dining room already buzzing with Christmas cheer. "Jacob," Lucy called out. "Merry Christmas. You're just in time. Diana's about to distribute presents." He took his seat, carefully not looking toward where Sophia sat with her family. But he was aware of her, the way she kept her gaze fixed on her plate, the slight flush on her cheeks, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for her tea. "You look tired, cousin," Lucy observed, studying him with those two knowing eyes. "Late night? Couldn't sleep? The storm was rather dramatic." "Indeed. I heard there was some excitement. Roberts mentioned someone took ill during the night?" Jacob kept his expression neutral. "A minor incident, already resolved." Lucy's gaze flicked to Sophia, then back to him. "How fortunate you were able to help." Before he could respond, Diana stood, clapping her hands for attention. "Present time. Everyone to the drawing room." The party moved en masse, children racing ahead with excited squeals. In the drawing room, Diana played mistress of ceremonies with obvious delight, distributing gifts with theatrical flair. Books, gloves, decorative boxes, all the usual Christmas offerings. Then she produced a wrapped canvas. "For Lord Clarendon and his lovely wife," Diana announced, "Mr. Livingston's portrait of Amelia, though I understand other portraits are still in progress." The painting was unveiled to general admiration. Jacob had captured Amelia's intelligence and warmth, the way she looked at Nathaniel when she thought no one was watching. It was some of his best work. "Extraordinary," Nathaniel said, clearly moved. "You've captured her perfectly." "Speaking of portraits," Diana continued with a smile that made Jacob nervous, "I believe Lady Sophia's is next. Perhaps we might see a preliminary sketch?" "It's not ready," Jacob started. "Nonsense. Even your rough work is worth viewing." Diana was already moving toward his portfolio, which he'd foolishly left in the drawing room the night before. "Please," Sophia said suddenly, her first word of the morning. "I'd rather wait until it's complete." Diana paused, looking between them with interest. "Of course, my dear, though I confess I'm desperately curious. Jacob's been quite secretive about it. The best art requires patience." Thomas Blackwood observed from his position by the window. "Though I notice you've been working at unusual hours, Livingston. I saw lights from your room quite late last night." "And early this morning," Eleanor added innocently. "The servants mentioned you were up before dawn." Jacob felt the speculation building, the careful social probing that could turn dangerous. "I find the light here inspiring, different from anywhere I've worked." "Inspiring," Marcus repeated, his tone amused. "Is that what we're calling it?" "What else would we call it?" Sophia's voice carried a note of challenge that made everyone turn to look at her. She'd raised her chin in that defiant way Jacob was beginning to recognize, the gesture she used when she was about to say something imprudent. "Artistic inspiration is perfectly natural," she continued. "Mr. Livingston is capturing the essence of his subjects, not merely their appearance. That requires understanding, observation, perhaps even unconventional hours." "Unconventional," Lucy murmured. "Indeed." The word hung in the air, weighted with implications. Jacob saw Nathaniel's eyes narrow, saw Charlotte and Amelia exchange glances, saw Diana's smile grow broader. "Speaking of unconventional," Lord Harrington said, clearly trying to diffuse the tension, "has anyone ventured outside yet? The snow must be 3 feet deep." "Perfect for Christmas walks," Sarah Mitchell suggested. "Once the paths are cleared. Or snowball fights," Catherine Harrington announced, bouncing with excitement. "Papa, may we have a snowball fight, please?" "I think that sounds delightful," Diana said. "Fresh air would do us all good after being trapped inside." Within minutes, the entire party was bundling into coats and gloves, spilling out onto the pristine white grounds. Jacob found himself swept along, ostensibly to observe and sketch, but really watching Sophia help Catherine build a snow fort. She was different outside. The careful propriety melted away as she showed Catherine how to pack snow properly, her cheeks pink with cold and exertion, her laugh bright as crystal when Catherine accidentally covered herself in powder. "Mr. Livingston," Catherine called. "Come help us. Aunt Sophia says Americans don't know proper snow fort construction. Is that so?" Jacob approached their fortification, trying not to notice how beautiful Sophia looked with snow in her dark hair. "I'll have you know Boston winters make English snow look positively tropical." "Prove it," Sophia challenged, and there was something in her eyes, a flash of the woman who'd kissed him last night. Before he could respond, a snowball hit him square in the chest. Charlotte Sears stood laughing with William, already armed with more ammunition. "Americans versus English," William declared, "for Christmas honor." What followed was glorious chaos. The battle lines were drawn with good-natured ribbing, Americans on one side, English on the other, with Lucy declaring that marriage didn't change one's origins and joining her fellow Americans. Jacob watched Sophia transform completely. Gone was the careful young lady from breakfast. She pelted her brother with deadly accuracy, shrieked with laughter when Charlotte retaliated, and commanded her troops like a general. At one point, she and Jacob ended up behind the same snowdrift, pressed close as they avoided enemy fire. "Truce," she panted, her breath misting between them. "Never," he replied, but he was looking at her lips, remembering their taste. A snowball from Catherine broke the moment, catching them both and covering them in powder. Sophia scrambled away, laughing, but the heat between them lingered despite the cold. The war ended when Diana called everyone in for hot chocolate, declaring it a draw to avoid any Christmas casualties. As they trooped inside, covered in snow and radiating joy, Jacob caught Sophia's elbow gently. "You have snow in your hair," he murmured, brushing it away. "Jacob," she warned, but her eyes were soft. "Just snow," he said innocently. "Nothing improper about snow." That afternoon, after Christmas dinner and more gift exchanges, Jacob found himself in the music room where Sophia was playing carols on the pianoforte for the children. He stood in the doorway, watching her fingers move across the keys with the same grace she brought to everything. "That was lovely," he said when she finished. She startled, not having noticed him. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." He moved into the room, closing the door partially behind him. "Sophia, about last night." "Nothing happened last night." Her voice was firm, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. "I took ill. You helped. That's all." "That's all?" She finally looked at him, and the heat in her gaze made his breath catch. "That has to be all. We can't." She stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "I have too much to lose." "Your writing. Everything. My family, my reputation, my freedom to create. One scandal, and I lose any chance to write, even in secret. So we pretend nothing happened? We finish the portrait, tomorrow, as you said. Then you return to London. I continue writing in secret. Life goes on." The words were sensible, logical, safe, everything their kiss hadn't been. "And if I don't want to pretend?" Jacob asked. Sophia's breath caught. "Then you're more dangerous than I thought. Sophia, please." The word was barely a whisper. "Please just let me be safe, at least until the portrait is finished, until you leave, until I can think clearly again." She stood from the piano bench, moving past him toward the door, but he caught her hand gently. "Tomorrow, then," he said, "for your final sitting." "Tomorrow," she agreed, and he felt her fingers tremble in his. "And Sophia, your writing, the passion you want to put on the page, you already have it. You just need to be brave enough to let it out." She pulled her hand free and fled, leaving him standing alone in the music room. Tomorrow. One more portrait session. One more chance to show her that some risks were worth taking, even if it meant risking everything. Chapter 7. Sophia sat on the settee in the morning room like a porcelain doll arranged for display, spine straight, hands folded, expression serene. Everything about her posture screamed propriety, distance, safety. It was also, apparently, driving Jacob to distraction. "No," he said for the third time, setting down his brush with obvious frustration. "That's not. You're sitting like a corpse again." "I'm sitting like a lady having her portrait painted." "You're sitting like someone impersonating a lady having her portrait painted." He ran his paint-stained fingers through his hair, making it stand at odd angles. "Where's the woman who pelted her brother with snowballs yesterday? Who nearly froze to death for the sake of accurate description? Who kissed me like... That woman was foolish, Sophia interrupted, her cheeks burning. This is my final sitting. Please just paint what you see. What I see is someone hiding. Then paint that. Jacob stared at her for a long moment, and she had to force herself not to fidget under his scrutiny. She'd been so careful this morning, rising early, dressing with particular attention to propriety, arranging herself exactly as she had for that first session. If she could just get through this final sitting without revealing anything more, without wanting anything more. Fine, Jacob said abruptly. If you want to sit there like a wax figure, I'll paint you as one, though I doubt your family will appreciate a portrait that captures none of your spirit. He returned to his easel, but his movements were sharp, aggressive. The gentle focus she'd observed in previous sessions was gone, replaced by something almost angry. They sat in tense silence for several minutes, the only sound the scratch of his brush against canvas. Sophia kept her gaze fixed on a point past his shoulder, trying not to think about how his shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that Lady Midnight would describe as, "No, stop that. Tell me about Boston," she said suddenly, desperate for distraction. Jacob paused mid-brushstroke. "What about it? You mentioned American women write more freely there. Is that true?" He studied her for a moment before returning to his painting. "Some do. There's a woman named Sarah Josepha Hale who publishes poetry and essays, another who writes under the name Mrs. Child, who discusses everything from housekeeping to abolition. And society accepts this? Society tolerates it. There's a difference." He mixed colors on his palette with careful precision, but tolerance is better than complete prohibition. "Do they write novels?" "Some, though most still use pseudonyms or publish anonymously." He glanced up at her. "Why? Thinking of trying your hand at novel writing?" The question was innocent, but Sophia's pulse quickened. "Perhaps, if I had the talent. Talent can be developed. Courage is harder to come by. And you think American women have more courage?" "I think American women have more options." He set down his brush and moved around the easel to study her position. "May I?" Before she could respond, he was kneeling beside the settee, his hands hovering near her shoulders. "You're holding yourself like you're in pain. Relax." "I am relaxed." "You're about as relaxed as a drawn bowstring." His fingers barely grazed her shoulder, adjusting the angle. "There. Now lift your chin slightly. No, not like you're facing execution, like you're looking toward something you want." "What am I supposed to want?" "What do you want, Sophia?" The question, combined with his proximity, made her breath catch. He was close enough that she could smell turpentine and sandalwood, close enough to see gold flecks in his brown eyes. "I want to finish this portrait," she managed. Liar. But he moved back to his easel, leaving her skin tingling where he'd almost touched her. "You want far more than that. You want adventure and passion and the freedom to write without fear." "You don't know what I want." "Don't I? You told me 2 nights ago, when you kissed me like the world was ending. That was a mistake." "Was it?" He was painting again, but his eyes kept finding hers, because it felt like the first honest thing you'd done in years. Sophia's careful composure cracked. "You don't understand what you're asking. You can return to Boston and continue your life. I have to stay here, in this society, with these rules." "Do you? What's that supposed to mean?" Jacob set down his brush again, wiping his hands on a cloth. "What if you didn't have to stay? What if there was another option? Such as, come to America." The words hung between them like a challenge. Sophia stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon? Come to America, to Boston." He moved around the easel, his expression intense. "You could write freely there, publish your novels without hiding." "My novels? I told you I only aspire to. To write like Lady Midnight, yes, and you could. In Boston, you could write whatever you wanted. Gothic novels, romantic adventures, stories about women who choose their own paths." Sophia's heart was racing. "You're suggesting I abandon my family, my country, everything I know, to pursue some fantasy of being a writer?" "I'm suggesting you consider a place where being a writer isn't a fantasy but a possibility." "And what would I do in Boston? A woman alone, no connections, no family?" "You wouldn't be alone." He moved closer and she found herself standing to face him. "I know publishers. My family has connections. You could stay with Lucy's family until you're established." Stay with your family? The impropriety of it made her laugh, though it came out slightly hysterical. Can you imagine the scandal? That's the point. In Boston, it wouldn't be a scandal. It would be seen as practical. An English lady of letters, come to observe American society. You could write about it. Travel essays, social commentary, anything you wanted. The picture he painted was so tempting it made her chest ache. Freedom. The ability to write openly. No more hiding, no more pretending. And you, she asked quietly, where would you be in this American adventure? Illustrating your books, painting, being your friend, and whatever else you'd allow. The careful phrasing revealed more than bold declaration might have. He was offering her freedom, but also himself, if she wanted him. It's impossible, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? You walked into a blizzard for your art. Crossing an ocean seems tame by comparison. My family would never forgive me. Your family wants you to be happy. I've seen how they look at you, like they're waiting for you to finally come alive. And you think America would bring me to life? I think being free to write what you want, how you want, without fear, that would bring you to life. Sophia turned away, moving to the window to stare out at the snow-covered grounds. Yesterday's snowball fight seemed like a lifetime ago, when she'd felt young and carefree and brave. I can't, she said finally. Can't or won't. Both. Neither. I don't know. She pressed her fingers to her temples. You're asking me to risk everything for a chance at something that might even work. I'm asking you to risk everything for a chance at being yourself. She turned to face him, finding him closer than expected. And if I fail, if I get to Boston and discover I can't write anything worth reading, then you'll have tried. That's more than most people ever do. That's not enough, isn't it? He reached out, his fingers barely brushing her cheek. Sophia, you're dying here, slowly, properly, but dying all the same. Every day you hide your writing. Every time you pretend to be satisfied with watercolors and pianoforte, a piece of you disappears. Stop. In Boston, you could be whole. You could write your passionate novels and sign your name to them. You could join literary societies, attend lectures, discuss books with other writers. Stop. Her voice was stronger now, angry. You're offering me dreams, not reality. I'm offering you possibility. You're offering me exile. The word hung between them, harsh and final. Jacob stepped back, his expression cooling. Is that how you see it? Exile? What else would you call it? Leaving everything and everyone I know for an uncertain future in a foreign country? I'd call it freedom. Your freedom. Your country. Your life. She was breathing hard now, emotions she'd been suppressing for days boiling over. It's easy for you to suggest I abandon everything when you're not giving up anything. You think I'm not giving up anything? His voice had gone quiet, dangerous. You think staying here, watching you choose safety over happiness, watching you disappear into propriety, you think that costs me nothing? Why should it cost you anything? You've known me 4 days. 4 days in which you've shown me more courage, passion, and truth than most people reveal in a lifetime. He moved toward his easel, picking up his brush again. But you're right. It's your choice, your life. I shouldn't have presumed. The formal tone hurt more than anger would have. Sophia wanted to say something, to bridge the distance she'd just created, but the words wouldn't come. They spent the rest of the session in silence, Jacob painting with mechanical precision, while Sophia sat frozen in place, wondering if she'd just destroyed something precious in the name of safety. Finally, Jacob stepped back. It's finished. May I see? He hesitated, then turned the canvas toward her. Sophia's breath caught. He'd painted her as she truly was, not the proper lady she'd been pretending to be this morning, not the passionate woman who'd kissed him, but somehow both and more. In the portrait, she sat by the window, light illuminating her face as she gazed at something beyond the frame. Her expression was contemplative, yearning, as if she were looking at a future just out of reach. In her lap was a book, but her fingers were ink-stained. A few sheets of paper were visible on the table beside her, covered in handwriting. It was subtle. Anyone looking would see a lady reading. But Sophia saw the truth. He'd painted her as a writer, a dreamer, someone caught between worlds. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's you. He began packing his supplies. The real you, whether you choose to be her or not. Jacob? The portrait will be dry enough to present tomorrow. I'm sure your family will be pleased." The dismissal was clear. Sophia stood, smoothing her skirts, trying to find words that wouldn't come. "Thank you," she finally managed. "For the portrait, for seeing me." His hands stilled on his supplies. "I wish that were enough." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with her portrait, the woman she could be if only she were brave enough to choose her. Chapter 8. Jacob watched Sophia push her food around her plate, contributing nothing to the dinner conversation. She'd been like this all day, present but absent, her body at various gatherings while her mind was clearly elsewhere. He should have been satisfied. He'd finished her portrait, captured her essence perfectly. Tomorrow he'd return to London, and she'd continue her safe, proper life, writing in secret. Exactly what she'd chosen. So why did it feel like he'd failed completely? "You're unusually quiet tonight, Jacob," Lucy observed from across the table. "Is everything well?" "Perfectly," he lied, taking another sip of wine he couldn't taste. "The portrait turned out beautifully," Diana said. "I peeked earlier. Don't look at me like that, Sophia. I couldn't resist. You've captured something quite special, Mr. Livingston." "Thank you." The words were ash in his mouth. "Though I must say, you both seem rather subdued for people who've created such art together." Diana's eyes held speculation. "One might almost think—" "I have a dreadful headache," Sophia interrupted suddenly, pressing her fingers to her temple. "I believe I'll retire early if you'll excuse me." "Of course, dear," Amelia said with concern. "Shall I send up some willow bark tea?" "That's kind, but I just need rest." Sophia rose, not looking at anyone, especially not at Jacob. "Good night." She swept from the room with barely controlled haste. Jacob watched her go, noting the rigid line of her shoulders, the way her hands clenched her skirts. "Poor thing," Charlotte murmured. "She's been looking peaked all day." "Perhaps it's the weather," Lucy suggested, though her gaze lingered on Jacob. "All this snow can be oppressive." The ladies withdrew shortly after, leaving the men to their port. Jacob sat through 20 minutes of discussion about hunting and politics, his mind entirely elsewhere. Where had Sophia really gone? She didn't have a headache, he'd learned to read her tells. She was upset, possibly about to do something reckless, like walk into another blizzard. "Excuse me," he said abruptly, standing. "I need to check on something." William raised an eyebrow. "Something?" "My supplies, for tomorrow's departure." It was a weak excuse, but no one challenged him. Jacob made his way through the quiet hallways, his heart pounding with an urgency he couldn't explain. He just needed to know she was safe, that she wasn't doing something dangerous in her emotional state. He knocked softly on her door. No answer. "Sophia?" He knocked again. "I know you're upset, but we should talk." Silence. Jacob glanced down the empty hallway, then tried the door handle. It turned easily, unlocked. He pushed it open, already composing apologies for the impropriety. The room was empty. A single candle burned on the writing desk, casting shadows across scattered papers. The bed was untouched, the fire dying. Where had she gone? He should leave. Being in her bedchamber was beyond inappropriate. If anyone found him here... But those papers on the desk drew him like a magnet. Her manuscript, the writing she'd risked her life to make authentic. Just a glimpse, just to understand what drove her to such extremes. Jacob moved to the desk, telling himself he was only ensuring she hadn't left a note about doing something foolish. But when he saw the handwritten pages, his good intentions crumbled. The writing was definitely hers. He recognized the same hand from the page he'd found Christmas morning. But this was different. More polished, more professional. He picked up a page, his eyes scanning the elegant script. The Count stood by the window, his American accent roughening his cultured words as he made his offer. "Come with me to Boston," he said. "You could paint there, create freely, be yourself." Jacob's breath caught. This was them. Thinly disguised, but unmistakably their conversation from this morning. He read on, unable to stop. Isabella wanted to say yes with every fiber of her being, to flee with this man who saw her true self, who offered her freedom and adventure. But freedom wasn't enough. Not without. The page ended. Jacob frantically searched for the next one, finding it half hidden under others. He offered her escape, adventure, freedom to be herself, everything she thought she wanted. But without his love, it would just be another kind of cage, a gilded one across the ocean, but a cage nonetheless. She needed to know she was loved for herself, not just rescued like one of his paintings that needed better light. Why? Isabella asked, her voice breaking. Why should I trade everything I know for uncertainty? Because you'd be free, he said. Free and alone, she whispered, but he didn't hear. He spoke of publishers and possibilities, of literary societies and lectures. He offered her everything except the one thing that would make her brave enough to take it, his heart. Jacob sank into the desk chair, the pages trembling in his hands. Dear God, he was an idiot, a complete blind fool. She didn't want rescue. She wanted love. She didn't want America. She wanted him, and he'd offered her everything except what mattered most. He kept reading, compulsively now, seeing himself through her eyes. The Count was brilliant and passionate, seeing through her facades with those artists' eyes that missed nothing except his own heart. He could read light and shadow, could capture truth on canvas, but couldn't see that Isabella would have followed him anywhere if only he'd asked her to come because he loved her, not because he wanted to save her. Christ, Jacob muttered, running his hands through his hair. How had he been so blind? More pages revealed more truth, scenes of barely disguised longing, of the heroine watching the Count paint, of stolen moments and interrupted kisses. But through it all was the same refrain. She needed love, not just freedom. A sound in the hallway made him freeze. Footsteps approaching. He should hide, should the door opened, and Sophia stood there, her eyes wide with shock. What are you doing in my room? Jacob stood, still holding her pages. Looking for you. You disappeared, and I was worried. Her gaze fell to the manuscript in his hands, and all color drained from her face. You read it. Sophia, get out. Her voice was deadly quiet. Get out right now. No. Jacob, I swear. I'm not leaving until you listen to me. He set down the pages carefully, then moved toward her. I'm an idiot, she backed away. You had no right. I know, but Sophia, I finally understand. I offered you freedom when you wanted love. I offered you America when you wanted me. Stop. I thought I was being noble, giving you options without binding you to me. But you don't want noble, do you? You want what your heroine wants, someone who loves you enough to say it. It's just fiction. It's us. Every word is us. He moved closer, and this time she didn't retreat. I've been so busy trying to save you that I forgot to tell you the most important thing, which is that I love you. Not your talent, not your passion for writing, not even your courage, though I love all those things too. I love you, Sophia Sterling, the woman who writes her heart onto pages and risks everything for truth. Sophia's breath hitched. You barely know me. I know you die for your art. I know you defend Gothic novels like they're personal attacks. I know you kiss like the world is ending and laugh like it's beginning. I know you want love and adventure and the freedom to be yourself. He reached out, cupping her face gently. And I know I want to give you all of that if you'll let me. Jacob, come to America with me. Not for freedom, not for writing, but because I can't imagine going back without you. Because I love you desperately and completely, and... She silenced him with a kiss, launching herself at him with the same passion she'd shown that night by the fire. This time, neither of them held back. He crushed her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, while she gripped his coat like she'd never let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophia's eyes were bright with tears. Say it again, she demanded. I love you. Again. I love you, Sophia. I want to marry you, take you to Boston, illustrate every novel you write, and spend my life proving that choosing love over safety was the best decision you ever made. Yes, yes, yes to all of it. America, everything. She laughed, the sound bright and free. Though Nathaniel will have an apoplexy. Let him. We'll face him together. Together, she agreed, then pulled back slightly. We should return before we're missed, if someone finds us here. You're right. But neither of them moved, standing there holding each other in her bedchamber, both knowing they were crossing a line they couldn't uncross. Footsteps in the hallway made them spring apart. Lucy appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with raised eyebrows. Jacob Livingston, what are you doing in Lady Sophia's bedchamber? I was looking for her. She left dinner unwell. And you thought her bedchamber was the appropriate place to check on her welfare? Lucy's tone was arch, but her eyes held amusement. How very concerned of you. Lucy, Sophia began, but her sister-in-law held up a hand. Whatever is happening here, it needs to move to a more appropriate location immediately. Nathaniel is already wondering where you disappeared to, Jacob. We were just returning, Sophia said, lifting her chin with that defiance he loved. Together? Lucy's eyebrows rose higher. Together, Jacob confirmed, taking Sophia's hand deliberately. Lucy looked between them, understanding dawning. Oh my, this should be interesting. She stepped aside from the doorway. After you both, though perhaps enter the drawing room separately? No, Sophia said firmly. No more hiding. She kept hold of Jacob's hand as they walked through the hallways, Lucy trailing behind them with barely suppressed excitement. Jacob could feel Sophia's pulse racing through their joined hands, but her grip was steady, determined. They reached the drawing room doors. Through the gap, Jacob could see Nathaniel in his chair by the fire, Marcus and William nearby, the ladies engaged in needlework and conversation. Ready? He murmured to Sophia. Ready. They pushed open the doors and entered hand in hand. The room fell silent. Nathaniel's gaze dropped to their joined hands, and he rose from his chair with dramatic suddenness, his face darkening. Before her brother could speak, Sophia lifted her chin and announced in a clear, carrying voice, I'm going to Boston with Jacob. Chapter 9. The silence that followed Sophia's announcement was so complete she could hear the fire crackling and her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Nathaniel's face went from red to purple to a rather alarming shade of puce. I beg your pardon. His voice was deadly quiet, which was somehow worse than shouting. I'm going to Boston with Jacob. Sophia kept her chin high, her hand firmly clasped in Jacob's. We wanted you to hear it from us directly. You wanted? Nathaniel stopped, visibly struggling for control. You are going nowhere, especially not across an ocean with a man you've known for 4 days. 5 days, actually, Sophia corrected, which was perhaps not helpful given the vein now throbbing in her brother's temple. Oh, well then, 5 days. How foolish of me to worry. Nathaniel's sarcasm could have etched glass. By all means, abandon your family, your country, and your reputation for a 5-day acquaintance. He's hardly an acquaintance, Lucy interjected from her position by the window, clearly enjoying the drama. They've been having portrait sessions. Very intimate, I understand. Lucy, Marcus warned, though his lips twitched. You've been having intimate sessions? Nathaniel's voice rose an octave. Portrait sessions, Jacob clarified. Entirely proper, mostly. Sophia wanted to elbow him, but that would mean releasing his hand, which she wasn't prepared to do. Mostly, Nathaniel advanced on them, and Sophia was reminded of why her brother had been considered formidable in his military days. What exactly does mostly proper mean? It means, Sophia said, stepping forward to match Nathaniel's advance, that we've gotten to know each other, that Jacob understands me in a way no one else ever has, that I've made my decision. Your decision? You're an unmarried woman. You don't get to decide to sail off to America with strange men. Strange? Jacob murmured. I thought I was making progress. This is not amusing, Nathaniel rounded on Jacob. You think you can just waltz in here, seduce my sister with talk of adventure, and steal her away? Nobody's stealing anyone, Sophia snapped. I'm choosing to go. You're choosing to ruin yourself. I'm choosing to live. The words burst out of her with more force than intended. For once in my life, I'm choosing something real instead of safe. Safe? Nathaniel's voice was incredulous. You call your comfortable life here safe? You have everything. Family, security, position. I have a cage. A pretty comfortable cage where I can embroider and play pianoforte and slowly suffocate on propriety. That's dramatic, even for you. Is it? When was the last time you saw me truly happy, Nathaniel? When was the last time I did anything that mattered? You matter to us. As what? The unmarried sister who needs constant supervision? The family obligation you all take turns managing? Sophia felt years of frustration boiling over. I'm 23 years old and I've never made a single important decision for myself. Because your decisions are terrible. Case in point, running off to America with a virtual stranger. He's not a stranger. He sees me, Nathaniel. The real me. The real you. Nathaniel laughed bitterly. He's known you less than a week. How could he possibly? He knows I write. The admission hung in the air. Amelia gasped softly. Charlotte and William exchanged glances. You write? Nathaniel's voice was carefully neutral. What sort of writing? Novels, stories, the kind of things you think are frivolous but that actually matter to thousands of readers. You're writing novels? The vein in Nathaniel's temple was back. Gothic novels, I suppose? Like that Lady Midnight rubbish you're always defending? Sophia's chin went higher. Yes, exactly like that. Dear God. Nathaniel ran his hands through his hair. My sister is writing scandalous novels and planning to elope to America. What's next? Will you take up acting? Join a traveling circus? Don't be ridiculous. I'm being ridiculous. You're the one throwing away your entire life for what? The chance to write penny novels in Boston? The chance to be myself. Yourself? Nathaniel's voice dripped condescension. You don't even know who that is yet. And I never will if I stay here. Sophia pulled her hand from Jacob's to gesture wildly. Don't you see? You all found love by breaking rules. Charlotte eloped to Gretna Green. You married Amelia after a wager scandal. Even Caroline, perfect, proper Caroline, kissed Daniel O'Connor in front of all society. But I'm expected to sit quietly and embroider until I die? That's different. How? How is it different? Because you're my baby sister, the roar echoed through the drawing room. In the silence that followed, Sophia saw something shift in Nathaniel's expression, from anger to something more vulnerable. You're my baby sister, he repeated more quietly. I'm supposed to protect you. From what? From life? From choices? From love? Love? Nathaniel's gaze sharpened, turning to Jacob. You love her? Completely, Jacob said without hesitation. After 5 days? After 5 minutes, if I'm honest. It just took me 5 days to understand it. Nathaniel studied Jacob for a long moment. And you'd marry her? In a heartbeat. But you haven't proposed? Jacob shifted slightly. We've discussed the future. You've discussed. Nathaniel's voice was rising again. You're planning to take my sister across an ocean, and you haven't even proposed? I was getting to it. Getting to it. Nathaniel looked murderous. You were getting to it? Nathaniel, stop being dramatic, Sophia interjected. Dramatic? My unmarried sister announces she's sailing to America with a man who was getting to proposing, and I'm being dramatic? Yes. No, Jacob said suddenly, and everyone turned to look at him. No, he's right. Jacob? Sophia stared at him in confusion. Your brother's right. I've been doing this all wrong. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. I offered you America, offered you freedom, offered you everything except what I should have offered first. What are you doing? What I should have done the moment I realized I loved you. He dropped to one knee, right there in front of everyone. Sophia Sterling, you brilliant, infuriating, magnificent woman, will you marry me? Sophia's breath caught. Around them, she heard gasps and murmurs, but all she could see was Jacob's face, the sincerity in his dark eyes. Wait, Nathaniel interrupted. Not good enough. I beg your pardon? Jacob looked up at him, still on one knee. If you're marrying my sister, you're doing it properly. Here, before you leave for Boston. Nathaniel, Sophia protested. No, you want to go to America? Fine. But you go as Mrs. Livingston with the blessing of your family and the sanction of the church. You do not slink off like you have something to be ashamed of. We weren't slinking. 3 days, Nathaniel continued as if she hadn't spoken. We can arrange a proper wedding in 3 days. Small, family only, but proper. You can't just decree. Actually, Jacob said, still on one knee, I agree with him. Sophia stared down at him. You what? I agree with your brother. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Marry me, Sophia, here in 3 days with your family watching. Then we'll go to Boston as husband and wife with no shadows or shame following us. This is insane, Sophia breathed. This is perfect. Lucy clapped her hands in delight. A Christmas wedding. Diana, we can have it here, can't we? Of course. Diana was practically glowing. Oh, how wonderful. I'll speak to the vicar immediately. Wait, Sophia said, but no one was listening. Charlotte and Amelia were already discussing flowers. Eleanor was suggesting music, and Lucy was planning the wedding breakfast. Sophia, Jacob said quietly, drawing her attention back to him. He was still on one knee, still holding her hands. You haven't answered me. The room fell silent again, everyone watching. Sophia looked down at this man who'd seen through all her facades, who'd offered her freedom and then love, who was willing to marry her in 3 days to satisfy her brother's propriety. "Yes," she said simply. The room erupted in congratulations and excited planning. Jacob rose, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that was definitely not proper, but Sophia didn't care. When they parted, she was laughing. 3 days, she murmured. "We're getting married in 3 days. Too soon?" "Too long," she replied and kissed him again, ignoring Nathaniel's groan of protest. She was getting married. She was going to America. She was going to write openly and live freely and love completely. And somehow, impossibly, she was doing it all with her family's blessing. Well, Nathaniel's grudging acceptance, but that was close enough. "I suppose," her brother said with deep resignation, "I should welcome you to the family, Livingston." "Thank you," Jacob said formally, then ruined it by grinning. "Brother," Nathaniel's eye twitched. 3 days, church wedding, proper vows, and if you hurt her, I'll hunt you down in Boston myself." "Understood. Good." Nathaniel turned to Sophia. "You're sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He studied her for a long moment, then pulled her into a fierce hug. "Be happy," he whispered. "That's all I've ever wanted for you." "I will be," she promised, tears pricking her eyes. When he released her, the planning resumed with vengeance. 3 days to plan a wedding. 3 days to prepare for a new life. 3 days until she could finally, truly be herself. It seemed both forever and no time at all. Chapter 10. Sophia stood before the mirror in her borrowed wedding dress, one of Diana's from years past, hastily altered by nimble-fingered maids, and tried to believe this was real. 3 days. Nathaniel had given them 3 days, and somehow Diana had worked miracles. The chapel was decorated, the vicar secured, the wedding breakfast prepared, and in less than an hour, she would be Mrs. Jacob Livingston. "You look beautiful," Amelia said softly, adjusting Sophia's veil. "Though you're trembling." "I'm terrified," Sophia admitted. "Of Jacob? Of everything changing, of leaving, of—" She stopped, unable to voice her deepest fear, that Jacob would regret this impulsive marriage once he truly knew her. "Change is frightening," Amelia agreed. "But staying the same when your heart wants more, that's worse." Charlotte appeared in the doorway, Lucy beside her. "The chapel is ready. Everyone's assembled. Jacob looks like he might faint if you don't appear soon." "Is he having second thoughts?" "He's threatened to come fetch you himself twice," Lucy laughed. "William and Marcus are practically sitting on him." Through the window, Sophia could see snow beginning to fall again, gentle flakes that made the world look fresh and new. Perfect weather for a new beginning. "Ready?" Charlotte asked. Sophia took a deep breath. "Ready." The chapel was small and ancient, its stone walls decorated with holly and ivy, candles flickering in every alcove. But Sophia saw none of it. All she could see was Jacob at the altar, his face transforming with wonder as she walked toward him. He looked magnificent in his borrowed formal wear. Marcus had provided clothing, since Jacob had brought nothing suitable for a wedding. But it wasn't the clothes that made her breath catch. It was the way he looked at her, as if she were the answer to every question he'd never known to ask. Nathaniel walked her down the aisle, his arms steady beneath her trembling hand. "You're certain?" he murmured one last time. "Completely." He squeezed her hand, then placed it in Jacob's with a look that promised violence if any hurt came to her. The ceremony was a blur. Ancient words about love and honor, promises to cherish and protect. Sophia heard herself responding, saw Jacob's hands shake slightly as he held hers, felt the cool metal of the ring Lucy had provided from her own jewelry box. "You may kiss your bride," the vicar announced. Jacob's kiss was gentle, reverent, nothing like the passion they'd shared in private, but somehow this soft press of lips, witnessed by everyone she loved, meant even more. "Mrs. Livingston," he whispered against her mouth. "Mr. Livingston," she whispered back and felt him smile. They turned to face their small congregation as husband and wife. Diana was crying openly, Gabriel trying to comfort her while grinning himself. Charlotte and William looked smugly satisfied, as if they'd orchestrated this somehow. Eleanor and Thomas sat close together, hands entwined. Even Lord Harrington had come, Sarah Mitchell on his arm, both looking delighted. As they walked back down the aisle, Sophia noticed something odd. Henry Crestwood, who'd arrived yesterday at Diana's last-minute invitation, was sitting next to Julian Lockhart. Given that those two had tried to duel the last time they'd both attended one of Diana's house parties, their current friendly conversation was remarkable. "Is that?" she started to ask Jacob. "Later," he murmured, guiding her past them. "We have a wedding breakfast to survive first." But as they exited the chapel into the softly falling snow, Jacob suddenly stopped. "Look there." He nodded toward the side of the chapel where Harriet Pemberton stood partially hidden by a pillar, her hand clasped with someone just out of sight. When Lady Pemberton's voice called out nearby, Harriet and her mystery companion practically leaped apart, both looking guilty and flushed. "Was she holding hands with someone?" Sophia whispered. "Definitely, though I couldn't see who." "Another Rothbury Abbey romance beginning," Sophia laughed. "Diana's house parties are becoming legendary." "Scandalously so," Jacob agreed, pulling her closer, "though ours is the best scandal yet." The wedding breakfast passed in a warm blur of toasts and laughter, tears and well wishes. By afternoon, their carriage was loaded, goodbyes were said, and Sophia found herself waving through the window as Rothbury Abbey disappeared behind them. "No regrets?" Jacob asked, pulling her against his side. "None." She settled into his warmth, watching the snowy countryside roll past. "Though we need to make 2 stops in London before we sail." "Of course. Where?" "First, my solicitor." Jacob pulled back to stare at her. "Your solicitor? Why would you have a solicitor?" "To manage my financial affairs, of course." "What financial affairs? You're an unmarried." He stopped. "Well, you were an unmarried lady living with your family." "Yes, but I still have investments to manage, funds to transfer to America." She kept her voice casual, enjoying his growing confusion. "Funds? What funds?" "Oh, didn't I mention? I have quite a substantial sum saved, nearly £10,000 actually." Jacob's mouth fell open. 10,000. How?" "From my work, naturally, which brings me to our second stop." She smoothed her skirts, not looking at him. "My publisher." "Your publisher?" His voice had risen an octave. "Sophia, what publisher? You said you were trying to write like Lady Midnight." "Yes, well, about that." She finally met his eyes, finding him staring at her as if she'd grown a second head. "I need to inform my publisher I'll be writing from America now. Mr. Blackwood has been very accommodating, but he should know about the change in circumstances." "Mr. Blackwood? Lady Midnight's publisher?" "Yes." "Why would you need to tell Lady Midnight's publisher anything?" She patted his hand gently. "I know, dear. I should have told you sooner." "Told me what?" "I am Lady Midnight." The carriage hit a rut, jolting them both, but Jacob didn't seem to notice. He was staring at her with an expression of such complete shock that Sophia bit her lip to keep from laughing. "You're what?" "Lady Midnight. I write the novels. All of them. Have been for 3 years now." But I illustrate those books." "I know. I've been reading your work for months." "I know. I told you I was half in love with Lady Midnight. I remember." "Sophia." He gripped her shoulders, whether to shake her or kiss her, she wasn't sure. "You brilliant, infuriating woman. You've been Lady Midnight this entire time." "The entire time." "The passionate novels I've been illustrating, mine. The manuscript pages I found, my next novel. Which reminds me, the hero might need some adjustments now. He was rather obviously based on you, and now that you're my husband, I should probably make him less recognizable." Jacob stared at her for another long moment, then burst into delighted laughter. "My wife is Lady Midnight. My proper English, perfect wife writes the most scandalous novels in London." "Not that scandalous," she protested. "The pirate scene in Chapter 12 of The Midnight Tower? That was artistic expression. That was brilliant." He pulled her onto his lap. "Propriety be damned. You're brilliant and devious, and I love you completely." "Even though I lied?" "Especially because you lied. Do you know what this means?" "What?" "We're going to be the most successful literary partnership in Boston. You'll write, I'll illustrate, and we'll scandalize all of America together." Sophia laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Livingston?" "We're already married, Mrs. Livingston. That's a promise." As he kissed her, the carriage rolling toward London and their new life beyond, Sophia thought about the woman she'd been just a week ago. Trapped, hidden, afraid to be herself. Now she was married to a man who saw her truly, heading to a country where she could write freely, with enough money to live comfortably while they built their dreams, all because of a portrait, a Christmas house party, a blizzard that forced her to be brave, and a man who'd painted her truth before either of them understood what it meant. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in fresh possibilities. Inside the carriage, Lady Midnight and her illustrator began planning their next chapter, together. The end. We hope you have enjoyed this presentation of The Artist's Christmas Portrait, written by Violet Sinclair, narrated by Isadora Blythe.